Going on to Goodreads after finishing a book to check out the reviews is one of my favorite things to do. Not only does it serve as affirmation and a validation of the opinions and conceptions that I have of my reading of the book, but it also makes me feel significantly better about my own reading comprehension because of the absolute Neanderthals that like to lurk in the review section. The Mote in God's Eye by Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle, who from this moment forward I will be referring to as Lairger, because A, I'm not saying both of their names, and B, it's a very cute couple's name, is a science fiction space opera set in the year 3000 and change during the time of the Second Era of Man, an authoritarian, imperialist, galactic-spanning human empire. The book is about humanity coming into contact with the very first alien species they have ever encountered, and how that unfolds for everyone involved, both the humans and the aliens themselves. Much like the reviews for this, the book was a bit of a mixed bag. I will say the book is probably stronger than the reviews, though. The very top review goes to our homeboy Lynn, who is the dude from that one movie I don't remember because I haven't taken my medicine today. And just from an initial overview, like, this looks solid. You know, it isn't a giant wall of text, or it's not filled with annoying gifs and extra punctuation that always just makes your brain kind of shut down the more you look at it. The actual structure of the review is honestly pretty good. Personally, I'm a big fan of the words good science fiction, just right up there at the top. Basically, every single review in here that has some positive or even negative reference has the Heinlein quote saying that it's quite possibly the best science fiction novel he's ever read. This can be useful for some people if they like Heinlein to know if they'll like this book. However, I'm glad that I didn't see this before I read it because I probably wouldn't have read it. I don't like Heinlein. I think he's boring. His prose is bad. He is a gross old man. I will not be taking questions. The Gremlins reference is kind of funny. I don't know if I completely agree with it outside of the fuzziness and the ears. Like, that's basically everything. You know, the Watchmakers have a lot more arms. They're way smaller and supposedly more spindly. They also have sex a whole lot more than Gremlins, at least from my observations. For context, the Motes kind of have a slave class of these little beings that they called watchmakers, which have essentially no consciousness of their own, but an incredible ability to take commands and work with tools and objects. The point about inconsistencies, I think, is very true. In this futuristic second empire of man, what basically happened in the lore is the Soviet Union and the United States merged together as kind of an alternate outcome for the Cold War, and as such humanity blossomed and we expanded, but then we had a civil war, as we always do, and then we expanded into space, went to planets, blah blah blah, and a bunch of different countries kind of got their own planet. Like, there's a new Scotland, there's a new Ireland, there's Ekaterina, which is like basically a planet full of Russians. Almost at random, the authors seem to write crew members or people from these locations with accents like Scottish or Russian, actually writing the prose as they would sound. Like, sometimes when I'm reading something by, I don't know, Sinclair, who is from New Scotland, like, it feels like I'm reading something straight off of Scottish people Twitter. It just very much feels like a prose choice of its time. It was kind of annoying. I felt like it really came and went, wasn't particularly great. I also agree with the point about the book just feeling too long in some places. Probably a good 100 or so pages could have been shaved off. There really was like a really good mystery element to it. There was a lot of substance to the overall mystery of the Motes and what is actually going on with them behind the scenes, and how all these interactions between humanity and the aliens are working together or not working together. But then there was just this annoying back end, like, bureaucratic and like side dialogue, particularly like romance stuff between two of our main characters, Roderick Blaine, who is exactly as you would imagine someone named Roderick Blaine would be like, and Sandra Fowler, who we will talk more about her later. She's a women character written in a space opera science fiction novel from the 70s. Like, you can guess what she's like. The last paragraph I more or less completely agree with. The Motes, the aliens, the mystery, the interaction with them, stupendous, masterful, amazing, loved every second of it. I thought it was incredibly well done. But if you're looking for a story driven more by the characters and less by the plot and overall mystery, then this is not the book for you, because outside of being annoyed by some people, I really didn't have very many strong feelings toward almost everybody except for the mentioned Admiral Kutuzov, who was a hardy Russian captain, one of the hard men on the outside, soft on the inside, but is actually a genocidal war criminal, but the book still wants you to like him. You know, he was fun. He was a fun little guy. And then at the bottom, there's a very creepy illustration of a Mote, which I think is a nice way to just punctuate it, you know? Overall, this was a pretty good review. Much like the book, I'd probably give this a solid 3 out of 5. I just took a break to go poop. Our next review comes from James, the second most popular one. James gave it 1 star, and I can tell just from the beginning that James is going to be a little bit of a problem child. Understanding the time and the context in which a book was written, I think, is very important to some interpretations that you can make. The second sentence of James' review talks about the captain's use of the word grape, minus the G, as an epithet or profanity throughout the book. Yes, that does happen. And yes, it is uncomfortable to read, objectively. If it does not make you uncomfortable to read, you're either a bad person or a gamer or both. But a quick Google search, if you are not familiar with some language of this time, you could know that sometimes that word was used in such context. It was used as an expletive, but phased out over time. It's the 70s. Crazy shit happened. People were smoking weed all the time. Good thing they don't do that anymore. The token female aristocrat comment, I think, is, while somewhat accurate, I think a broad dismissal of some of the things that she does throughout the story, which I will get into later. I also think the point of stupidity? Ironic. Of stupidity and naivety of the big players or many of the characters in the story is just an objectively stupid point and not at all what actually happens in the book. So already, first paragraph, our boy James, or our non-binary friend James, really not teeing it off strong here. The more I read through this, the more I could nitpick throughout this entire review, but I'm just gonna do some favorites, some highlights from our boy James that I think are particularly reductive, stupid, or just proves that like they just didn't understand or put much thought into actually reading the book. At the beginning of the book, our boy Roderick Blaine, who is the captain of MacArthur, is charged with taking our previously mentioned Sally Fowler and another character, Horace Bury, from this planet where a rebellion is currently being squashed. Sally was rescued from an internment camp there, and Horace Bury is being taken to be transported because he's being accused of being one of the reasons why that rebellion and massacre of the planet kind of began in the first place. As Roderick is in the middle of making his way over with both of them on his ship, there is an urgent call from the big command people at Earth Empire HQ. And they call up and they're like, "Hey, yo, everybody who can hear this, there's a thing. There's an alien guy probe ship dude who's just kind of sailing through our space. And yeah, go check it the fuck out. And Rod, being the closest one there, is like, I do kind of have this mission, but also, I want to see a mother flipping alien. It's important to mention that the next closest ship is quite a far distance away, and by the time that they get there, it might be too late to actually do something about the probe, because they mentioned that the probe is headed directly into a sun. Now, old James seems to think that instead of, seeing what this probe is, feeling that, this militaristic, imperialistic, authoritarian empire that has spanned vast hundreds of worlds would, have... As I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, I don't know why James thinks that this big militaristic empire would somehow just let this thing fly through and then deal with it later. Both from like a ethos standpoint of the human empire, but also just from like a story standpoint. Like, oh yeah, this hotshot captain who wants to prove himself is the closest person to the alien probe thingy, but he's not gonna go check it out. He's just gonna go the heck home, and then we're gonna just talk more. And 300 pages later, we're gonna like go see the aliens or something. Like, James, what are you thinking here? The comment also about how the aliens can't come to us for unknown reasons is also dumb. One of the main points of the book is that the humans have this special engine, this hyperspace drive thingy called the Alderson drive, which lets them more or less warp between 2 points in space, making travel instantaneous upon vast distances. And I feel like the fact that they have this to begin with is an indication that it will be important, since it keeps getting emphasized in the beginning of the book how powerful it is. And the fact that during the whole probe interaction at the beginning, they estimate that the probe was sent probably like 100 years ago. So like, if these aliens do have spacefaring technology of that sort, then why the flip did they send that probe 100 years ago instead of just fucking popping out and saying hello themselves? Like, multiple levels. Like, James, use your noodle, my guy. Like, come on. As I mentioned before, though, I do agree that as a whole, I think James's point about the writing being mediocre is more or less all right. Like, as I mentioned, it very much ebbs and flows. Certain things the author are definitely better at writing. The fun mystery is great. The really cringe shoehorned romance and lovey-dovey scenes between Rod and Sally almost made me put the book down. This next comment ties into that point I made at the beginning of this, where understanding the context that it was written, the time period in which language and even certain stereotypes existed, is important in understanding and intaking of a book. James says that the book is written in 1974 and feels its age is 100% true. So I don't know how you can just ding it a shit ton of points because it has that vibe. Like, that is just unfortunately some things that a lot of white men from that period wrote in this style. There are certain tropes, there are certain uses of language, there are certain stylistic choices or lack thereof that just appear within a lot of that time period. Not everybody can be the GOAT, Ursula K. Le Guin here. I'm not saying to just dismiss it because it was the 70s. It can obviously have a relevant impact on your enjoyment of it, but complaining that a book feels 50 years old when you're reading a book that is 50 years old just feels like a dumb comment without the caveat of like taking everything else into account that did age well, like a lot of the central mystery and many of the interesting themes around communication. The point about Sally falling for Rod based on his existence is 1,000,000% true. I feel like they almost never interact, and then all of a sudden Sally's like, I'm in love with Rod now, and now we're gonna kiss and Just a little sidebar about Sally, Salide bar, if you will. I think she gets unfairly dinged for only being a stereotype because, like, yes, she could definitely do more, but I think she does get to do some like kind of interesting stuff with her anthropology degree and her interest in that she has, like communicating with the aliens, being one of the first people to really interact with them in a face-to-face way. I think she does show interest in understanding what they are, and she actually makes some good points early on in theorizing what is like up with like the first Mote, the first live Mote that they actually encounter. She just gets progressively dumber as the story goes on, which sucks because her initial presentation when she was rescued by Rod is that she was more or less taken from a death camp, like a concentration camp on this rebel planet. And it talks about how like some of the trauma she endured. She would watch people be taken away and never come back, or just straight up killed. It talked about how she even took on like a bit of a leading role, like comforting people in that camp. And when she is taken out of it and they interact with her for the first time, like she is obviously deeply troubled by everything that she saw. And I thought there was going to be some like legitimately interesting drama and exploration of her character based off of how she was shown to us. But that's really just kind of forgotten about. In fact, at a certain point, it's just never mentioned, and you would never guess that Sally had gone through such a horrible, traumatic experience. In fact, I don't even remember it being, like, actually addressed again until the beginning of the second fucking book, which is just kind of crazy to me. But overall, Sally is lackluster, and her potential is more than she actually got in the end, which is really unfortunate. I wish she was more than she became. This is probably one of the dumbest points in James' review, and this annoying paragraph basically talks about how James can't believe that in the year 2500, which by the way, he's fucking wrong, it's the year 3000 something, thank you very much. James seems to think that it's so impossible, so unlikely that religion could somehow still play a major role, be a major influence in humanity as a whole. James, we have had organized religion for thousands of years. We have had religious and spiritual entities and organizations before we could cross continents. Just because we can cross planets does not magically mean that that will go away. Particularly given the, royal nature, empire of man. There's like an emperor, something, Sparta, whatever. It makes a lot of sense that the divine would have a lot of power in a societal construction like that. Also, James, there's big religious overtones throughout the entire fucking book. The Motes have a concept called the Crazy Eddie, which is this more or less mad prophet idea that they think that this being, this entity will come and somehow break the cycle, which is the main thing that they're trying to solve about their civilization. The Motes' big secret, spoilers, is that they have explosive reproduction and have no way to control it. So they regularly go through endless cycles of growth and collapse and growth and collapse. And that's what they're trying to fix, and that's why their interaction with the humans is so important. They see the humans as a possible way to solve that problem. If they can get their hands on the Alderson drive, if they can allow themselves to get off their singular planet, then they would have more resources and more places to go, and they could spread without having to worry about continual collapse on one single planet. Religious motifs are very important in this entire book. James, what are you talking about that it doesn't make sense for this to be religious? Then James hees and haws about characters, lack of characterization, blah, blah, blah. Heard it before. Yeah, we know it's not great space opera. It is what it is. But the point that I disagree with, however, is in one of the last paragraphs in which James says that he thinks that more or less everybody is fucking stupid when it comes to dealing with the actual aliens. James says, quote, All the characters in this story completely underestimate the aliens and completely overestimate their ability to understand or deal with them. And this is just objectively wrong. The entire reason why there are so many different characters that may or may not be fleshed out is because there are so many different conflicting opinions on the aliens and what to do about them and how to interact with them. That's where all this tension and this drama and this mystery is building, because everyone is trying to figure something out. They're all trying to make best guesses on what this species is. How do they play it from a diplomacy side of things? How do they play it from an infiltration side of things? There's mind games here. Like at one point, there is an instance where they come into contact with a Mote and they invite it on their ship along with a couple of the little watchmaker guys. And the watchmakers accidentally get out. They get on the ship. And obviously, this raises some alarms. They take drastic measures to attempt to get rid of them. And unfortunately, it doesn't work. However, the humans don't want to tell the Motes about it, because they are not sure if the watchmakers can actually communicate with the Motes and give them information about the ship, which could lead to vulnerabilities. I'm not a commander. I'm not a diplomat. I don't know what the right fucking move is in that situation when you're dealing with a whole new ass race that very clearly is hiding something. I don't know what James wants. Like, there is so much tension and confusion and people trying to make the right educated guesses based off of all the information that they have here. People arguing back and forth, people making power plays. Like, it's just interesting. It's just well done. And does James just want like absolutely zero conflict in this entire book? First, he doesn't want him to go after the probe. Then he just doesn't really want him to interact with the aliens in any meaningful capacity. Like, it sounds like James just didn't want to read this book, but kept reading it anyways. The last point that I'm just going to touch on briefly is James' belief that the aliens are not, quote, weird enough. And I just think that's so ridiculous. They are fascinating, from their physiological differences to their societal structure to how they interact with technology on a fundamentally different level than we do. Instead of having objects dedicated for one purpose, like a phone, for example, specifically for doing Reddit, all of their things are made out of different parts that they disassemble and reassemble into other things to fulfill different purposes all the time. It's like this endless cycle of reclamation and reapplication of different things. They have absolutely no technology. Even elements of their spaceships, they continually take apart and recreate to fulfill a different purpose that they need at a time. And I don't know about you, but that sounds really fucking interesting to me. That concept completely changes how their society operates on a fundamental level from ours. And that isn't even talking about their like caste system and how they've been like bred into hyper-specific roles, which is a parallel, or rather an inverse to humanity. We have very specific uses of components in technology to do different things, but the Motes do not. However, we as a race, as a people, as a society, are very versatile and broadly are capable of doing different things. But the Motes, however, they are bred specifically to be in a caste of different abilities. Like, some are workers, some are mediators and translators, some give orders, some do regular just farm work, some fight, spoilers, but we can do all that. It's the polar opposite of how humans are bred and operate, at least to normal people. The tech bros want to make sure that we definitely only fulfill one individual role for the rest of their lives, like some AI. However, I think it's really fucking interesting to structure a society like that. I don't know what James wanted here, but this is such a fascinating, interesting idea for an alien race and an amazing mirror for humanity. Like, it's just, what do you want, James? What do you want? James was exhausting. I am giving this review a 1 out of 5, exactly like he gave the book, because my God, James, pay attention, man. Come on. Our third review from JL, excuse me. First glance, honestly, a little lacking. Always find it annoying when people feel the need to put just images of guys in their reviews, like, what purpose does this serve? I don't need to know what the author looks like. I can already get a perfect image of what he looks like from imagining him based off of how he writes women. This is exactly what I was envisioning. Why is this here? I will admit that the quote is very relevant to the overall themes and structure of the book. However, I do not think that pulling it without context is necessarily that enlightening to people, particularly followed by the old man. One would assume that based off of the ordering that the old man said that quote, and in which case is the insinuation that this old man is in fact a hardworking, bug-eyed monster, because his eyes don't look very bug-like. They look very inset to me. More or less, the rest of the reviews kind of talk about the same thing. There's another 1-star review that more or less mirrors a lot of the same lack of reading comprehension our boy James has. There's some other positive reviews that more or less cover the same points. I think as a whole, much like the book itself, I would probably give the reviews somewhere around a 3.5 out of 5. Good for different reasons, honestly, but a bit of a mixed bag. I would recommend it, honestly. I really would if, you don't have a problem with some of the things that I mentioned. However, I would not recommend reading the second book. I got about 25% of the way through and I had to stop because it basically took everything that I hated about the first book and cranked it all the way up to 11. Somehow the book was a good 150 pages shorter, but from the quarter that I read, it felt so much longer. Oh my God. It was written 20 years later. And somehow feels even more sexist and racist than the first one in the 70s, which is honestly kind of impressive. I did want to give a special shout out to one of the reviews on the second book, which is probably one of my favorite reviews I've ever read in my life. I'm just going to read the whole thing from our boy Marius. This is their only review ever. Considering the rating, I find the book to be utterly disappointing. It probably assumes the reader to be familiar with the previous book in the series, and for readers like me, it is confusing, and after a while, I lost interest and kind of forced myself to finish it. Big shout out to Marius for willingly reading the second book in a series that they were aware of, and then going on Goodreads and complaining that it was confusing because they didn't read the first book in the series. The people of Goodreads, everybody, thank you, and good night.